This is Ann Macey. It is such a privilege to volunteer for Historic Augusta. I hope this will bring a little more understanding regarding the pandemic, not the one that's raging now, but the one in 1918 when Woodrow Wilson was president. There are many theories regarding where the pandemic actually started. China, Great Britain, France, or even in the United States in a county in Kansas, spread by troops returning from Europe. Law courts were closed, as were schools, most businesses, restaurants, and theaters. Citizens were ordered to wear masks. Quarantine was the order of the day, every day. And on top of all that, drugs such as antibiotics and antivirus, as well as clothing for protection against the virus, had not been developed. History does seem to repeat itself, doesn't it? Dr. Ann Caldwell, well-known Augusta historian, author, and director of the Center for Study of Georgia History at Augusta University, researched the 1918 pandemic. And I might add that it must have taken her many months because there is an overabundance of information about this horrific plague which cruelly descended upon Mother Earth 102 years ago. You might like to read Dr. Caldwell's complete article published in the October 2014 issue in the Augusta Magazine. Dr. Caldwell states in her article regarding the pandemic death count was far more than the death toll in the Great War itself, at that time the deadliest war in human history. Britannica World War I casualties states 20 million deaths, 21 million wounded, and 40 million casualties. These figures included both military and civilians, and it also states casualty numbers vary to a great extent. Dr. Caldwell mentions that the most susceptible during the pandemic were not children and the elderly, but young adults in their prime, ages 20 to 50. The pandemic began in the spring of 1918. A case which was thought to be a vicious influenza was reported. Dr. Caldwell, in her article, describes this virus as a most fatal and infectious disease. Case upon case continued to pop up everywhere, bringing more uncontrolled illness and death. In August 1918, the second wave hit, and the virus had grown more aggressively. Another report that I read said Georgia was not affected with the virus until October 1918. So, in this pre-antibiotic, pre-antiviral era, the Public Health Service's main mission and most effective tool in epidemics was quarantine. The Augusta Chronicle reported that each new location where the virus had sprung up printed the numbers, the affected and infected, and of course, sadly, the many deaths. People were ordered to stay home again, and definitely not to gather in groups. Today we call this social distancing. Camp Hancock, which was located near Daniel Village on Wrightsboro Road in Augusta, was, according to Dr. Caldwell, dealing with overworked doctors and nurses. The Medical College of Georgia set up an open-air emergency hospital with tents on their lawn, believing the tents would provide the fresh air necessary for recovery. Dr. Caldwell's article reads as though she was describing the pandemic of 2020. The similarities are truly staggering. The deaths, economy, the lack of desperately needed supplies, quarantine, no football, no tennis, no schooling, no churches, and stay home. Talk about déjà vu. Today, of course, we are so fortunate to have computers and the internet to help us cope. Yes, we really are very fortunate. A lot of dreadful suffering continued, not only here in Augusta, but all over the world. People had the pandemic on their doorstep. World War I was still hovering in France, increasing deaths from the virus and from the fighting. However, the long, weary war, which had started on July the 28th, 1914, was very close to ending. On November the 11th, 1918, Germany surrendered. Dr. Caldwell, from her dedicated and thorough research, describes the celebrations that took place in Augusta at the end of World War I. Germany surrenders. That day there were, according to the Augusta Chronicle, tens of thousands in a monster victory parade as city and camp celebrate triumph of Allied arms. In the streets from the building windows along Broad Street, men, women and children joined in the celebration, which surprised all Augustans in immensity, in patriotic outbursts, in enthusiastic acclaim. It was a demonstration which must have gladdened the heart and stirred the soul of every person who saw it or who participated in it. But sadly, another outburst of the influenza appeared within a few days after the parade. More sickness, more deaths, and again schools, churches, theatres, and gathering places, etc., were closed as a precaution, followed by more weeks of quarantine. Dr. Caldwell stated, the quarantine on the verge of being lifted would now remain. The price for our big peace parade last week. If I may, I would like for a moment to talk about President Wilson's trip to France. Although the pandemic was far from over, President Wilson was scheduled to attend the Paris peace talks, but on April the 3rd, 1919, shortly after he arrived in France, he became extremely ill. The president's aides were able to help him during this very difficult time, and they managed to save the peace talks from being scuttled. Woodrow Wilson did recover from his illness, but later suffered a severe stroke, and he died in 1924. Wilson's boyhood home, which historic Augusta will reopen to the public when it is considered safe to do so, stands in gratitude to the 28th President of the United States of America. I would like to encourage you to learn more about President Woodrow Wilson and his boyhood home in Augusta by visiting our website at wilsonboyhoodhome.org. And thank you so much for listening.